So yeah, anyway, this here is the Intel Core Duo, which is one of Intel's very last purely 32-bit CPUs, aside from the Atom and some of the later Pentium 4 chips, which were technically 64-bit capable and only had the 64-bit extensions disabled, thus disqualifying it from my made-up mental competition of last purely 32-bit x86 processor. Now, without further ado, let's power on the system. And here we go. So, I think the first thing that we should do is answer the age-old question, can it run Crysis? And at 1080p with very high settings across the board, yes, this system can indeed run Crysis. Mostly. Now, the question of whether or not I can play Crysis is a little bit harder to answer. Now, here's Crysis once again, but this time I can benchmark for the sake of watchability. Now, running at 1080p high with 2xAA, our average across 3 runs was about 19.673 frames per second with a minimum of about 8.7. It's a lot less than what I personally expected, considering how I did that earlier bit with, you know, very high settings, but I don't know, it felt playable to me. I'm just saying, though. I don't exactly have the most experience as far as playing Crysis goes, so what do I know? Far Cry, on the other hand, sticks around at a nice and playable 130 to 150 FPS. I'd completely forgotten to have RivaTuner log the statistics to a file, so the best I've got as far as frame times go are whatever you see on screen. Whatever the case may be, both the 1% and 0.1% lows stayed above 60 FPS the entire time I played anyway. Here's Doom 3 at 1080p with 2x anti-aliasing. Once again, just like Far Cry, I kind of forgot to actually log the results, so whatever you see on screen is pretty much the best I've got. So as far as our average FPS goes, we have something over 100 on average. Our 1% lows are hovering around 60 most of the time, if not higher. Sometimes a little bit lower, with our 0.1% lows being, on average, above 30.
Yeah, they said he just lost it. Shipped home this week. Lose one, gain another. No shit. I wonder who they're gonna move to Bravo. Business on Mars. The spokesperson stated that increased activity is shifts, a tactical deployment to outlying planetary sectors. Authorities continue to search for the activists responsible.
Continuing the trend of me completely forgetting things while recording, here's Universe Sandbox Legacy, which it turns out you can still buy it, just not from Steam. So we're running here at a windowed 1080p with whatever default settings it decided to start up with. I completely forgot to check that. But anyway, it is a stuttery mess. Our graphics card here is really not doing much, if anything, while our first CPU core is struggling. So yeah, our average FPS is around 30-ish, give or take some, but our 1% and 0.1% lows are very solidly within the single digits, so it's a stuttery mess. Also, I finally remembered to full screen the game after a little bit. Also, I'm not entirely sure, but it seems like the 1% and 0.1% lows might be being read incorrectly here, because they're just consistently at 1 FPS, even though, at least in this part of the game, it's not really as stuttery. Moving on to more modern titles now, we've got Clustertruck running at 1080p fantastic settings. Our average FPS is like 12, and our 1% and 0.1% lows are absolutely horrendous. And I have a feeling that our system might be RAM limited in this case, because we're hitting about 1.1 gigs of used memory, and given how this is a 32-bit system, we can only use a maximum of 4 gigabytes for the entire system without any specific special tweaks such as enabling PAE. And other than that, the system does appear to be pretty balanced load-wise, of the CPU cores and the GPU being pretty well loaded. Tomb Raider is in a bit of an interesting position with an average of 37.1 FPS and 1% and 0.1% lows that honestly are a little bit intriguing, to put it simply. They both started off in the single digits, roughly around 5 or 6, but as the scene progresses, they rise to 33 and 29 respectively. Universe Sandbox 2, much like Universe Sandbox Legacy before it, is very CPU heavy, and with an average of 13 to 20 FPS depending on scene, and 1% and 0.1% low both sitting well within the single digit range, it's not exactly the best experience to play if you don't enjoy stuttering. Among Us at 1080p predictably runs perfectly fine, though the 1% and 0.1% lows tend to kind of fluctuate quite a bit depending on what's going on, and especially here once you see where we have an emergency meeting being called, both of them just drop to the single digits for a moment. Goat Simulator has some launch issues concerning available RAM in that it runs out of memory and crashes at the title screen if you try and start the game through Steam. Launching it directly using its executable fixes this, however. As far as performance goes, the game is visibly stuttery in scenes where objects are being thrown around, but otherwise, with an average of 24 FPS, it's an okay experience. You see this? This line right here? Let me tell you right now, it's lying. Minecraft 1.21 runs despite what Microsoft says about needing a 64-bit system. However, at default settings in 1080p full screen, it struggles heavily in keeping up with both 1% and 0.1% loads, indicating very bad stuttering, especially as chunks are generated or loaded in. Also, for some reason, standing under this one specific tree really lagged me out. Even with the following performance mods, Minecraft 1.21 continues to struggle on this 18-year-old 32-bit only CPU, seeing an improvement in average FPS, but overall still being just as stuttery as before. Given how little the 8800 GTX here is being utilized, I wouldn't be surprised if much of the optimization being done really doesn't help all that much given the age of the processor. Because the CPU is still so heavily taxed that I'm pretty sure that at this point it ultimately makes little to no difference. Turning down the rendering and simulation distances to 8 from their default of 12 while leaving all the other settings untouched helped tremendously in improving the gameplay experience. There's still a few hangups here and there, but overall the stuttering is noticeably reduced compared to before. Also, I'm not quite sure what's going on with the 1% and 0.1% lows here, as they're both mostly stuck in the single digits despite the gameplay experience being, at least personally speaking, far smoother than before. So, yeah, that's the video. Despite being a whole 18 years old and stuck in the bygone era of 32-bit computing, the Core Duo in this system still has some kick to it. It very obviously struggles in the few modern titles that still support running on 32-bit CPUs, but it's a surprise that those titles are able to run at all still, given how the final 32-bit only x86 chips rolled out over a decade ago themselves. Anyway, in the next video, we'll be focusing more on canned benchmarks like Bench and Cinebench, and diving a little bit into overclocking. See y'all then. My PC crashed twice during the editing of this video, so I'm just gonna hope that it's able to render this whole thing without doing so a third time. Hey, yeah, it's me again. Subscribe.